Felix Dennis was a publisher. I remember Felix says he wrote a book called How to Be Rich, and he wrote a poem which went, if I can remember it, it went, "Ideas, we've had 'em since Eve first met Adam, but take it from me, execution's the key. Good fortune, the truth is the harder you work, the more that you sweat, the luckier you get. The money, go find a likely investor. To get what you need, you toadies to greed. The talent, go find it, but first wine and dine it. It's tedious work with a talented jerk. To win it, you have to be in it, but never be late to quit and cut bait. Expansion is vanity. Profit is sanity. Overhead begs and it walks on two legs. The first step, just do it and bluff your way through it. Remember to duck, Godspeed and good luck." So it's kind of easy, that's business. I wanted to be one of them. And we were kind of scrimping and saving, and I wanted to be one of them, and I think that went very deep inside me. And, you know, I felt inadequate is probably the truth, and so I became a bit of a show-off. And, you know, I wanted to compensate for that. And I remember at the age of probably 15, 16, I remember telling people, this was back in the 60s, I remember telling people, early 60s, I remember telling people that I was going to be a millionaire by the time I was 20. And then I got to 20, and it was the end of the 60s, and, you know, we were doing peace signs and, you know, all the things we did in those days. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I think I'll put it off till I'm 30. I was having a good time. And then I remember going through the drama of my 30s. And I remember getting to 40 and suddenly realizing and remembering this little 15-year-old boy who'd had this dream. And I remember it was a sort of tear your hair out moment. And I remember thinking to myself, my God, I've completely forgotten to become a millionaire. And we were sitting there having lunch, and he said, and I said, what about sushi? And I'd always, you know, I was obsessed with sushi. I'd lived in LA quite a bit, and I used to, you know, it's like some drugs for me, you know. And, to some people is what I meant in those days. And I was sitting, and I said, you know, what about sushi? Nobody's really done sushi over here. And there was this sort of oriental silence. And he looked up at me out of this oriental silence. And he looked at me in the eyes and he said, what you should do, Simon, is a conveyor belt sushi bar with girls in black PVC miniskirts. And it was like, and it was before the internet. There was nowhere to research it. And I remember getting on the phone, and I was calling the trade and calling Japan. You can imagine the calls I had. And within a few weeks, I remember getting these things through the post. You know, pre-internet, researching was very hard in those days. And I remember one day, you know, started to open these sort of Japanesey envelopes tied up with bits of string, you know, and katakana writing, really exciting to get them. And I opened one day, and all the others had been in Japanese, and you could just look at the pictures. And I discovered that there were 2,500 of these conveyor belt sushi bars, and they'd been in Japan since the 1960s, and nobody had ever heard about them. And I opened this one day, and it was in English. And at top, it said, how to start your own conveyor belt sushi bar. And it told you everything about how to do it. I remember sort of holding it like this and thinking about, like, you know, I hope nobody else has seen this, you know, quick, you know, so, you know, action. And we opened that restaurant, and with it, you know, it was the first week it was empty. And the second week we had a queue down the block. It was the most amazing, amazing feeling, and of relief. And then, of course, the paranoia and terror starts to build up again as you think, I've got to keep that going, and what's the next? And every time you open another one, it's a threat. And we actually did open the second and the third, and the fourth one didn't do so well, and the fifth one was a disaster. So suddenly we're hemorrhaging, and the sixth one. You know, at the beginning, the money had been rolling in. And so much that I didn't believe it, but when I turned up to the closing meeting in the city, and so there's 40 lawyers in a room, and there's all this stuff, and all the lawyers suddenly started being nice on the last day. And we had a drink, and they said, where do you want the money? And you know, you know probably some of you, but when you do a closing meeting like that, they actually take the money and they wire it straight to you. And I hadn't arranged for anywhere to put the money because I hadn't really believed it was going to happen. So I've got out my checkbook and gave them the sort code and said, you know, there you go. And I remember leaving that meeting and walking down Oxford Street where I lived in those days and realizing that this money from the sale of 75% of Yo Sushi would be in my bank account. And since I'd given them the current account number, presumably it would be in the PIN machine. So I thought I'd better have a look. And so I did go and stand in the queue, and I got to the PIN machine, and I put my PIN number in, and there on the screen was the number. And I can tell you honestly that if anybody tells you that money doesn't make you happy, they're lying. And I did, I'll tell the story against myself, but by this time there was a queue behind me. And there was a bloke sort of coughing and tutting behind me. And I did turn around to him. I said, listen, mate. I said, cop a look at that. Life, you know, what are we doing here on this earth? What's it all about? You know, the mystery. But I never ever met the person who went out to do what they dreamed of doing, had the courage to go out and do what they dreamed of doing. I never met the person who regretted it, regardless of whether they later succeeded or failed. But I met many, many people, especially they'd come up and tell me this, who later in their life looked back and said, I wish I'd taken those chances when they were there. Because they do come across all of us, the chances. It's just they pop their head up and we go, no, risk averse or whatever. I never met the person. In Japan, they don't have a word for good luck, but they have a word for, their equivalent expression for good luck is keep going. So that's what I say to all of you is keep going. Thank you very much.